What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, and I am in this video going to be playing Aggression Luke versus Command Han. So I am playing Luke with Tarkentown. My opponent Woo from the Late Night Gaming crew is playing Han with the Energy Conversion Lab. So Aggression Luke versus Command Han. I'm debating my choices with respect to what I should be resourcing here. I was considering resourcing the Sabine and going for C3PO instead because my opponent has the initiative. But I'm thinking, there's no way my opponent doesn't have Sabine as an available card. That's not something I have to worry about. So I'm going to play out Sabine Wren, 2 cost 2 3, and attack you, deal 1 damage to the defender, or a base also has this defensive ability that isn't very relevant. My opponent leads off by playing a resupply, and I'll take the initiative. So resupply and just put this event into play as a resource. So what to get the 3 resources to play resupply, my opponent used Han's ability for a temporary resource. And I'm going to try and push damage through while this I'm going to try and push some damage through while my opponent is ramping up here. Um, one of the downsides of ramp cards is that they typically don't develop your board very well. I mean, sometimes you can get a good trade with the super laser technician, especially if you ambush with the energy conversion lab. But cards like resupply don't assist your board. My opponent then plays another resupply, so this is kind of scary here. My opponent could use Han's ability here and actually deploy Han this turn, but doesn't opt to. Ends up taking the initiative instead, and so that to me that indicates my opponent is going to play home one. So typically, if you bring Han out when you have 5 resources by using his ability and then attacking to get up to another one up to 7, then you're likely going to be playing Mace Windu or Han Solo the units. If you wait until you have 6 resources and then use Han's ability, as my opponent's doing here, then attacking with Han will go up to 8, and that indicates home one. So I'm thinking I have a good idea of what my opponent's doing here. In the meantime, I'm just going to send some damage to the enemy base, and next turn I'm going to have actually a pretty decent option for dealing with home one because I have a Vanquish in hand. So could be a lot worse. However, I do note that my opponent probably messed this up, and I think we discussed this also after he played it. When you remove resources that you added as temporary resources with Han, you get to choose from all your resources what to discard. It doesn't have to be the one that you just added. So the only unit my opponent has in discard right now is Agent Callus, who can't be played with Home 1. And if there were a 3 cost or cheaper heroic unit that could be played with home one instead, this play would be getting a lot more value. So it ramps up to 8. I'm going to play out Kanan. My opponent's going to play home one. And luckily for me, does not have a heroic unit to play from the discard pile for 3 less, but still has a very powerful unit. 7/7 restore 2. Each other friendly unit gains restore 1. And yeah, in chat there, we says I messed up, put the wrong card in discard. Yep. So something like Ezra Bridger, wing leader to buff home one. Fleet lieutenant wouldn't get value here because there wouldn't be a unit. Yeah, so my opponent had an Ezra in there that could have been discarded and would have been substantially better with this play. I'm gonna just lead off with a Vanquish, defeat home one immediately. So defeat a non-leader unit, very strong for me. I have another Vanquish that I'm holding in hand. Against this sort of deck, I really want to keep all my Vanquishes and use them on those big plays. Take down Home 1, take down Han Solo, the unit, take down, Mace Windu if the opponent is running the alternate version of this deck with aggression. So Han could defeat either of my units here. I end up attacking with Yoda because I want to get the restore. Um, There was a waylay played there to send Kanan back to hand, kind of annoying. Not like Waylay is an interesting card. If you play it on something really big, it's a lot of value. If you play it on something not all that big, as we saw here, it doesn't generate a ton of value, but it does generate tempo. So it's actually card disadvantage to play Waylay, but you gain tempo, especially if you have a stronger unit. Now here's a weird little bug. The cards going towards my hand hang in the air and don't actually go there. I thought I had lagged out, but actually, for whatever reason, like TTS just like half drew the cards, and then when I just grabbed them and took them to hand, it all worked. So not sure what was happening there. I see an open fire, which is really, really fortunate for me in this situation. As It's going to allow me to take out Han pretty easily here. I could play this open fire, and then I could play this open fire, and then I can play either the wing leader to buff Luke, or I could play Luke's lightsaber here. Both very good plays, I think. So open fire to defeat Han immediately. It's a lot of value for me. Um, we see an a wing leader buffing Ezra. I have Yoda hit the base and restore two. Ezra can defeat Yoda easily, but it will cause me to become buffed. So it could, or it will cause me to draw a card. So it could be worse. Yoda is kind of an odd one. So I deploy Luke. My opponent uses a fleet lieutenant to have Ezra defeat Luke, um, which is, it's painful, but that's how it goes sometimes. And then I'm not going to get a chance. So I could play my own wing leader, but it would get no value here. I think what I do is I think I take initiative here. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think I take initiative here, and then I'm going to use Tarkin Town to clear out that Ezra. So that will get that threat off the board. Resourcing there, or thinking about resourcing this Yoda versus this wing leader. The problem with the wing leader is I don't have a rebel unit for it right now. I could conceivably play Kanan and then wing leader to buff Kanan. That's like a quite reasonable play. But right now, I'm going to resource the second wing leader. Yoda is interesting here. The restore from Yoda is helpful, and the card draw on death is helpful, given that I'm in a kind of unfavorable spot. So I could Tarkin Town Kanan, but I end up actually just deciding to take out Kanan with Yoda, and then I draw a card from Yoda and draw another Yoda. So a little bit of a funny situation there. So now I'm going to play Kanan, and I can potentially ramp into, or I can buff Kanan with a wing leader. But my opponent has Han Solo the unit and defeats Kanan in one shot before I can play the buff. I play out one of the extra copies of Yoda instead, then, since the wing leader wouldn't be useful. My opponent does still have a fleet lieutenant. Um, could just take the initiative to allow Han to kill Yoda or hit the base or something before removal. I do have my Vanquish in hand, and I've just drawn another Vanquish, so I'm feeling like it won't be too hard to get rid of Han. My opponent has Han defeat Yoda. Um, that's fine. I'm gonna Vanquish Han this turn and then play another Yoda. That's my game plan. Yoda is not the strongest unit in the game. Three for a 2/4 is a pretty bad stat line, but the Restore 2 can be helpful, and drawing a card can be helpful, and he synergizes with It Binds All Things, which this deck is playing. I play another Yoda. My opponent defeats this Yoda with Agent Callus, drawing a card. I also draw a card, of course, and then I use the Tarkin Town here to defeat Callus, get him off the board. My opponent then plays a Lothal Insurgent, a new card, 2 cost 3/2, and when you play it, if you've played another card this turn, your opponent draws a card and then discards at random, and the random discard uh, actually takes out that third Vanquish, which is super negative for me. That is a card that I really want to have for when the next Han or the next Han or the next Tome One comes out. So losing that third Vanquish is a very major setback in this game. Um, And we'll see, but we'll see. It's quite possible that the opponent will not have a great opportunity. I play the Vigilant Honor Guards, 5 cost 4/6 with Sentinel when undamaged. Um, this is a interesting unit. I don't think it's the best unit ever, but in a lot of situations, it can get relatively good trades. It's not uncommon for it to get a 2-for-1 just because it has good stats and it has Sentinel at least temporarily. Works a lot worse against Darth Vader though, because he has a very easy time pinging it off. So then we see my opponent plays a Fleet Lieutenant and knocks out a fleet lieutenant sending the wing leader to attack my base. I play my wing leader buffing the vigilant honor guards. I do still have also the ability to add a shield with Luke. My opponent sends a buffed Lothal Insurgent. What is that? Yeah, buffed Lothal Insurgent. I think that's what that card's called. Coming in for 5 damage on the Vigilant Honor Guards. All 3 fleet lieutenants on the board for my opponent there, and I'm going to throw a shield on the honor guards. I arguably should have thrown the shield on there before playing the wing leader. And the reason that I say that is that if I had put the shield on before playing the wing leader, um, the first attack into it would just remove the shield, and then it would still have Sentinel afterwards, which would put me in a better position in terms of holding the line there. However, there is some concern that the opponent will waylay it. Okay, so we see in this case, my opponent uses the Energy Conversion Lab to ambush in play a unit that costs 6 or less against ambush a rogue operative. The rogue operative has Saboteur, so it's able to pierce the shield, and it's defeated in the attack, but it does take out the Vigilant Honor Guards there. So one thing I can do here is I can just play another Vigilant Honor Guards. I could also play Obi-Wan, but I do end up going with the basic Honor Guards there instead. And I think the reason for this is that I want to then shield the honor guards, and then also play a removal card here. But I think that in retrospect, playing Obi-Wan might have been stronger. I guess the concern with Obi-Wan though is that my opponent could just trade wing leaders, and then Obi-Wan wouldn't have a card to buff if he died this turn. So that's a potentially negative outcome for me, and the opponent could just throw the fleet lieutenants in, although I think I would have a chance to disrupt that by giving a shield and then removing one of them. So once again, we see a draw and then random discard. I accidentally showed my hand there. And this time it ends up that the card that I randomly discard is the Kanan that I drew from the ability, so it doesn't disrupt my existing hand at all. That's a kind of odd ability because sometimes it's low impact and can even improve your opponent's hand if you discard a bad card, but they drew a good card. But other times, like we saw earlier when I discarded that Vanquish, it can really mess with somebody's game plan. So we'll see how this goes. I plan open fire to take out one of the fleet lieutenants. My opponent plays Admiral Akbar and uses his ability to ping off the wing leader. So Admiral Akbar, when played, you may deal damage to a unit equal to the number of units you control in its arena. So the one enemy wing leader allows 1 damage to get through there. I've drawn Mace Windu, who's sort of my top of the curve power hitter here, and is hopefully going to be able to do some major damage to the enemy units. This is a pretty good situation for Mace Windu because my opponent has a large number of smaller units, which is kind of what he's good against. So Mace Windu is a 5/7 with ambush, and when he attacks and defeats a unit, you may ready him. So I'm going to have him take out a wing leader there. Yeah, when this unit attacks and defeats a unit, ready him. So wing leader defeated, Mace Windu gets readied up. I'm going to be able to give him a shield using Luke's ability, and then take out another unit, and then maybe take out another unit beyond that. We see Admiral Akbar being defeated by the Vigilant Honor Guard, but taking down their shields. One thing that I can do here is I can just give Mace a shield. Another thing that I could do here is I could play out the Restored Arc. I think I give Mace a shield. Yeah, that's right. So now shielded Mace Windu, still defended by the Vigilant Honor Guards here. So if my opponent had a card like another copy of Han Solo, couldn't actually use it to clear Mace. My opponent, however, has a home one, which I do not like seeing. So home one deploys, and this is where I really wish I still had that Vanquish. Um, but we're gonna have to see. We're gonna have to see how we handle it. Home one deploys a copy of Leia Organa and exhausts my Mace Windu. I'm gonna play the Restored Arc. Still have the Vigilant Honor Guards as a sentinel there, but the opponent can send one of those ground units in to be defeated by the honor guards, and then have the other one, still go in for the base. And so we draw up, and I'm just going to concede here because it's over. I can't stop the home one before it attacks and destroys the base. So interesting situation there. Ultimately, the random discard of that Vanquish was super costly for me. If I had had it here, I would have at least been able to defeat home one, but I'm not sure that it would have actually allowed me to win the game. At the moment, at the time, I thought that was like a critical defeat. But looking at this now, I don't know. I was pretty low on life. It's very possible that like even if I had the Vanquish to kill home one here, my opponent would have been able to prevail anyway, just because I had taken a very good amount of damage here, and I'm not sure I would have been able to recover even with the Vanquish. That being said, losing the Vanquish was a very negative spot, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure it was as catastrophic. It seems conceivable to me I would have lost that game anyway. So hard to say. We're gonna go to game two though. I think I have three games here for this video. So same matchup, same decks. Let's see how it goes. This time I'm going to be starting off with the Green Squadron A-Wing, which is a really good starting unit. I actually have a pretty awesome starting hand here. I have the Green Squadron A-Wing. I'm going to be able to buff that with Wing Leader or with Fleet Lieutenant, and I have Luke's lightsaber for later on in the game as well. So this is a very strong looking situation. Green Squadron A-Wing, 2 cost 1/3 with Raid 2. My opponent plays C3PO, guessing 3. So choose a number, then look at the top card of your deck. If the card's cost is that chosen number, put into your hand. So the opponent gets to draw an Ezra Bridger. You do have to reveal it before putting it into your hand. Easy resource decision here because I draw a second copy of Luke's lightsaber. Having one copy of that card is great. Having two copies of that card is not great. It doesn't really do very much. So one thing that I could do here is I could Fleet Lieutenant my A-Wing into the base for 5. The other thing that I can do that's a little riskier but also higher upside is Wing Leader. The reason it's riskier is because my opponent could conceivably waylay the A-Wing at this point after I give the experience tokens, whereas Fleet Lieutenant can't be countered in that way. Um, and doesn't look like that's going to be the option, though. My opponent guesses 3 again with C3PO on an attack and misses, and the A-Wing swings in for 5 damage. So this, starting off with Sabine Wren or the Green Squadron A-Wing, and then buffing it with a Fleet Lieutenant, or I'm sorry, with a Wing Leader, is I think one of the best starts you can have in terms of aggression. Waylay is one of the few things that can counter it, although depending on what unit you buff, conceivably conceivably other stuff could be played. You could see in the ground if you buffed a ground unit, there's some that could be taken down by like shoot first or surprise strike, maybe, depending on what they had in that arena. But generally speaking, this is a very good start. And so here I have the initiative, so I'm able to attack and deal another 5 damage. My opponent attacks with Ezra, and this is something that I'm overall it's not great for me. My opponent opts to discard a Fleet Lieutenant, which is interesting. Maybe setting up for home one later. I play a Fleet Lieutenant of my own and send in the Wing Leader for another 4 damage. So I'm pushing damage very quickly to the enemy base here. And my opponent does still have C3PO, who does another point of damage to my base. I think guesses 3 and I think misses. Now, one note is that Ezra's ability, you can just leave the card on top of your deck. So Ezra can actually spot for C3PO in a similar way that R2D2 can. But I think in this case, my opponent wanted to get that into the discard pile. However, he then misses the C3PO draw and says, maybe next time I keep it on top with. And yeah, it seems pretty reasonable. I'm going to shield the Fleet Lieutenant that I just played. My opponent plays Bright Hope. Bright Hope is a 4 cost 2/6 with Sentinel. And you can choose when you play it to return a unit from the ground arena to hand, and if you do, you draw a card. So right now, that's not going to be very relevant for me. That's not going to be very relevant for the draw effect, but the 2/6 Sentinel in space, I mean, that's relevant just for its stats. My current space units can kind of batter through that, but it is going to be an obstacle that will prevent me from pushing that damage through to the enemy base instead, which is of course what I would prefer to be doing. I'm going to lead this turn off by playing the Vigilant Honor Guards, a 4/5 with Sentinel while it's undamaged. My opponent plays Leia, Defiant Princess, and exhausts the buffed A-Wing. I'm going to have the shielded Fleet Lieutenant hit the enemy base for 3. And my opponent could deploy Han this turn. Let's see if that ends up happening. Yeah, so it's going to be Han's ability used. I'm going to take the initiative, and my opponent can make quite a few plays at this point. Luckily, some resources were already spent, so we're not going to see Han solo the unit, which would be a big problem for my Vigilant Honor Guards. I would be able to take them out without taking any damage. But I didn't want to attack with my wing leader into that Bright Hope. So I ended up just taking the initiative, and my opponent has quite a few attacks left to make. So C3PO attacks into the Vigilant Honor Guards and is defeated. Guesses 3 and hits with another copy of Ezra Bridger. Bright Hope takes out the wing leader. My opponent still has Ezra and Han, and plus whatever else he wants to play this turn. So quite a few things could happen here. After next turn, I will be able to play Luke, and I do still have that lightsaber in hand, so I'm hoping for some big results there. My opponent swings in with Ezra, knocking the shield off my Fleet Lieutenant. My Vigilant Honor Guards no longer have Sentinel because they are damaged. I probably should have moved them back a bit so they'd be in the same row. And my opponent still has Han to attack with as well. Looking at the top card with Ezra, looks like the opponent opts to leave it on top of the deck. Shoot first with Han to defeat the Vigilant Honor Guards and avoid taking damage. And then the Energy Conversion Lab used here in an unusual play, playing another copy of Ezra, which does defeat his first copy of Ezra, thanks to it being unique, but allows him to ambush and defeat the Fleet Lieutenant, who would otherwise be threatening damage to the base. And that does mean that he gets to use Ezra's ability again, and this time opts to discard the top card, which is Admiral Akbar. It's going to be a pass there. I have some strong options here. I have the open fire, Luke's lightsaber, it binds all things. Got the restored arc and C3PO. I really have a lot of things I can do here. So for one, my Green Squadron A-Wing can attack and defeat Bright Hope immediately if I want, because it has the experience from the wing leader earlier. I could have played Open Fire to clear Bright Hope instead. That would allow Green Squadron A-Wing to threaten the enemy base directly, but the problem with doing that would be that it would be more vulnerable to removal on the A-Wing. So I ended up just taking the attack. My opponent attacks with Ezra, hitting my base for 3 and playing a wing leader. I say, oh wait, I meant to resource. Is that cool? My opponent generously allows me to do so. I kind of neglected that. I end up playing Open Fire to defeat the Leia Organa Defiant Princess that had been buffed by the Wing Leader. Um, Han swings into my base for 4 damage. At this point, I'm overall pretty happy with the situation in that Luke seems to be able to deploy safely, so I deployed Luke. Um, and my opponent's only at 17 life, so one thing that I could do here So I could give Luke his lightsaber and then use it on. I could give Luke his lightsaber and then use it against Han to defeat Han. But actually, I think what I want to do here is just go for the base. So if I attack the enemy base with Luke, it'll go to 21 life. That means that either the A-Wing or Luke can defeat the enemy base in one attack. And now Luke's attack also put a shield on the A-Wing, which means that it is not about to be defeated. My opponent then takes the initiative, and I play it binds all things and use the 2 damage there to defeat Ezra. This is actually, I think, a minor mistake. I think it would have been better for me to use Tarkintown to defeat Ezra and then use It Binds All Things to defeat the Wing Leader, or to use Tarkintown to defeat Ezra and then just play Luke's lightsaber to put a shield on Luke. But I think it's kind of, yeah, I don't think it's entirely relevant at this point because my opponent would have to stop both of my units at the same time in order to avoid Han or in order to avoid either the A-Wing or Luke just attacking the base and cannot do so. So this one ends up being a win for me, and we're 1-1. Let's move on to game three. So game three, same matchup. These have been some interesting games here. The first one was pretty long. This one was a little faster. Um, Terrible starting hand, tons of events, and no 2 cost unit. So that's just going to be a mulligan. I mulligan into this is a decent start. I'm going to be able to play C3PO, and I'm going to be able to back him up with potentially entrenched to contest the arena. My opponent plays that new card again, but the thing is, the the way this card works is the Lothal Insurgent only causes a discard if you played another card this phase, and my opponent didn't. So because of that, it's just a 3/2 body and doesn't cause the discard effect. Okay, so this turn, what I'm looking at is I can entrench C3PO and use that to take out the insurgent, maybe. But my opponent, before I can do that, uses a fleet lieutenant to have the insurgent take out C3PO. So I'm just going to play Yoda instead. Opponent takes the initiative. I could use Tarkintown to defeat the insurgent, but that seems not worth it. I'm just going to draw up. So obvious plays this turn. I could do Kanan. I could also do both Entrenched and the Green Squadron A-Wing. I think I end up saying that I'm going to go for the Kanan style. I think looking at it now, I think I maybe prefer resourcing the open fire and then having the option to either do Entrenched or Green Squadron A-Wing, Entrenched plus Green Squadron A-Wing or Kanan. So my opponent uses the Energy Conversion Lab to ambush Yoda and defeat him with a rogue operative. But I luckily draw another Green Squadron A-Wing with Yoda's ability. I use Tarkintown to defeat the rogue operative that was just played, and then I bring out Kanan, trying to contest the ground arena here. On attack, you may discard 1 card from the defending player's deck for each friendly Spectre unit, and then you get some damage healed from your base based on the number of aspects there. So I'm drawing a lot of space units here. This turn, I think I end up resourcing this Yoda, and I think my game plan is to play 2 different fighters from hand and shield one of them. But we're going to lead off with Kanan clearing the Fleet Lieutenant. He takes some damage, and my opponent has to mill a card. It is Admiral Akbar who has 2 aspect icons, so I repair 2 damage from my base with Kanan's ability. Very strong ability, honestly. It's like a restore. It's like a restore. It's in between restore 1 and 2, depending on how many double aspect cards your opponent is playing, or cards with 2 different aspects rather. And then it has actually upside beyond that if you have more Spectre units out. So if I had like Sabine Wren the unit, for instance. So my opponent's going for the Han deployment this turn. I bring out the 2 fighters and shield up the restored arc. Han hits my base for 4. 7 resources, brings out a Han Solo unit, which I am quite worried about. Han Solo unit, but doesn't have anything to ambush with it, so it's not maximum value. But I don't have a great answer. I haven't drawn one of those vanquishes to just take that unit out in a favorable trade here. So don't have an immediate answer necessarily. Okay, so my opponent has to discard some temporary resources. So I do have this restored arc, which could be useful. So restored arc swings in there, 2 damage, heals my base for 1. The problem is I'm going to take like 10 damage this turn if these guys go for the base, so that's not great. Leia exhausts the Green Squadron X-Wing. I play a restored arc 170. Han leader hits my base. I'm going to use Luke's ability to heal the restored arc. My opponent plays a Bright Hope and returns Leia to hand, which is a very strong play. Not only do you potentially get that Leia ability again, but you also get a card draw. I deploy Luke, but unfortunately my opponent has a shoot first to buff Han and defeat Luke. So very tough situation there. Unfortunately, that's how it goes sometimes. Difficult to counter. Difficult to counter that. I guess what I could have done there is I could have used the open fire first and then seen if my opponent was going to pass or not. I knew there was the floating resource, there was the risk of shoot first. And so if my opponent then passed, that would indicate shoot first was present and I could just take the initiative, at which point I'd be able to play this takedown or use Mace Windu to defeat Han. At the start of the next turn. So I think that would have been a more prudent way to handle the situation. Unfortunately for me, it ended up with my Luke being defeated relatively easily, which is definitely not what you want in this matchup. Um, I would ideally have been able to play him and then get value from that lightsaber. So right now I'm attacking with the so I took some damage from Han and I'm attacking with the restored arc to heal. My opponent is just pressing damage to the base here, and unfortunately I'm not sure I'm going to be able to recover. I bring out Mace Windu, who defeats my opponent's Han, stands up. My opponent's pushing more damage to the base though, and I'm in big trouble here. In fact, I have to take the initiative because if I don't, because I'm tapped out and can't defeat my opponent's Han this turn, my opponent will be able to just take the initiative and swing in with Han for the win. So instead, we see my opponent playing a C-3PO, guessing 3, hits the guess, getting a wing leader, and then this is actually not correct. We did so the Bright Hope is a unique unit. So we had 2 copies of Bright Hope out at once, and that's actually not allowed, which makes this situation slightly less hopeless than I thought it was. But I don't end up drawing something that can stop Han, so that's the game anyway. I think what I would have needed there would be a Sentinel unit. Yeah, I think I needed a Sentinel there. And if there's a Sentinel and there's only one Bright Hope in play, then there's some chance that I would win. But if my opponent had a Surprise Strike or a Fleet Lieutenant or a Shoot First, could just send in bonus damage to my base and win it there anyway. So kind of a desperate circumstance. That was an interesting game. I think the key moment for me was bringing Luke out and having him be defeated by Han. I think that I should have used the open fire on Han, and by that method, kind of stalled. And if my opponent takes the initiative, then if my opponent attacks my base with Han, it's like, okay, that's what he's going for. I can bring out Luke, and if my opponent passed, I could then take the initiative myself instead, and then use the takedown to defeat Han at the start of the next turn without him being able to do anything, then bring out Luke. But ultimately wasn't able to think of that in the moment, and my opponent was able to get the win here. So that was three cool games. Ultimately went 1-2 with Han winning out over Luke this time. And I will have both my aggression Luke deck list and actually my opponent's command Han deck list in the video description below if you want to check out these builds. So thanks to Woo from Late Night Gaming for the good games and for sharing the deck list there so that I can add it to the video description. Additionally, I will have a link to my introductory article over at the Fifth Trooper if anyone is interested in checking that out. It might be especially useful for people who are newer to the game or who want to show that to someone who's newer themselves. So thanks to y'all for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I'll catch you guys later.